My name is Henry Walker, though around the little town of Maple Creek, most folks don't bother with formality. They just call me Old Man Henry. 75 years I've walked this earth, and for the last 50 of them, I've lived in the same red brick house on Cedar Lane. I built it with my own two hands when I was young, strong, and newly married to my Helen. Back then, I had nothing but grit, a set of borrowed tools, and a promise to her that I would make us a home worth raising a family in. That house is more than walls and shingles. It holds the sound of Helen humming while she cooked, the scent of her roses blooming each spring, the faint marks on the kitchen door frame where I penciled David's height as he grew. Even though Helen's been gone 12 years, I still feel her here. Every corner of that home is a piece of her, of us. So when David told me he was marrying again, I smiled and kept my doubts to myself. His fiancée, Lindsay, was striking, tall, polished, always dressed like she was headed to some gala instead of the grocery store. 10 years younger than David, she looked like she belonged in a glossy magazine, not in a small town like ours. But what struck me most wasn't her smile or her fancy ways. It was her eyes. The first time she stepped onto my porch, she barely looked at me. She didn't even hold her gaze long on David. No, her eyes swept over the porch columns, the brickwork, the wide lawn shaded by the sycamores Helen and I planted. There was no warmth in that look, no appreciation, just hunger. And in that instant, I knew she wanted something that wasn't hers to take. From the start, Lindsay made it clear she wasn't much interested in me. She never asked about my past, never wondered what my late wife was like, never paused to hear the stories behind the pictures that hang along my hallway. Wedding portraits, family holidays, David's baseball trophies lined on the shelf. Those things to me are the thread of our family. To her, they might as well have been dust on the wall. Her questions always turned back to the house. How long have you owned this place, Mr. Walker? Ever thought about selling? You'd make a fortune. You know David. Don't you think this would be the perfect place to raise children? She tossed those words out casually, like harmless small talk. But I caught the way she leaned forward just a little when she asked. I caught the glint in her eye when David laughed it off. He thought she was joking. I knew better. The cracks showed even more at the wedding. It was a quick, polished affair, held in a hotel ballroom with centerpieces that looked like they cost more than my first pickup truck. When it came time for me to give a toast, I stood with my glass and spoke from the heart. I told them love wasn't about money or convenience. Real love is patient, selfless, enduring. It holds on when times get hard and grows deeper with every passing year. For just a second, I caught Lindsay's face harden. A flicker of irritation crossed her polished smile, as if my words had scratched her veneer. Most of the guests clapped politely, none the wiser. But I saw it, and deep down, I knew that moment confirmed what I had felt from the start. Her intentions weren't about love, not the kind I was talking about. 2 days after the wedding, my suspicions stopped being just hunches. They became fact. It was a quiet afternoon. The late sun was slanting through the sycamore branches, and I was settled in my recliner with a glass of sweet tea. That house, with its creaks and sighs, has a way of lulling me into peace. But then came a sharp rap at the front door, 3 quick knocks, firm and deliberate. I opened it to find Lindsay standing there, dressed in a cream-colored suit that looked more suited for a courtroom than a casual visit. Her hair was pinned back tight, not a strand out of place. Beside her stood a man in a dark jacket, carrying a polished leather briefcase. "Good afternoon, Mr. Walker," Lindsay said, with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "This is Mr. Daniels, a notary public. We're here to finalize some paperwork." I raised my brows. "Paperwork?" The notary stepped forward, already flipping open his case. Inside were neat stacks of papers, clipped and waiting. Lindsay tapped one with her manicured finger.
"The deed transfer," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "David and I need a proper home to start our marriage, and this place is far too much house for a man living alone." All you need to do is sign right here, and the property will be in our names." For a moment, I just stared. My sweet tea, still in hand, rattled against the glass. "Transfer of my what?" She kept smiling, but there was steel in her eyes. "The house. It makes sense, doesn't it? You'd be happier in something smaller, easier to maintain." That was the moment I knew my battle had begun. I set my glass down on the side table with a thud, the sound sharp enough to make the notary flinch. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from anger rising in my chest. "Young lady," I said, my voice steady, "this house is mine. I built it nail by nail, brick by brick. It carries the sweat from my brow and the laughter of my family. You've got no right, no claim, and certainly no decency to come here and ask me to hand it over." Her smile slipped. For the first time since she'd stepped onto my porch, the polished mask cracked, and what I saw beneath it was colder than stone. She crossed her arms, voice sharp. "Don't be so dramatic, Henry. You're old. You live here alone. Wouldn't it be easier to move into a smaller place? A condo, maybe. Somewhere you wouldn't be a burden." That word, burden, hit like a burning brand. I thought of Helen, of how she used to say I carried more on my shoulders than any man should. I'd never been a burden to anyone in my life, and I wasn't about to start now. I stepped closer, looking her square in the eye. "Tell David that if he wants to talk about this house, he can come himself like a man. But you get off my porch before I call the sheriff." The notary snapped his briefcase shut so fast it nearly caught his fingers. "My apologies, Mr. Walker," he mumbled, backing down the steps. Lindsay lingered a second longer, her eyes hard and unblinking. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice low with fury. Then she turned on her heel and stormed away. I stood in the doorway long after they'd gone, heart pounding, but certain of one thing. The fight had only just begun. That night, the phone rang just as I was settling into bed. The house was quiet, the way it always is when night falls, just the creak of the rafters and the hum of the old refrigerator. I picked up the receiver, and it was David. His voice sounded tired, strained, like he'd been dragged into a fight he didn't want to be in. "Dad," he began, "Lindsay told me you yelled at her today." I sat up straighter. "She brought a notary to my house, David." A notary. She shoved papers in my face and tried to trick me into signing away the home your mother and I built. What would you expect me to do? Invite her in for cake? There was a heavy silence. Then a long sigh came over the line. "Dad, maybe she has a point. That house is too big for you. You're alone. Wouldn't it make sense to downsize? You could get a nice apartment in town. Let us take this place off your hands." My chest tightened like someone had tied a rope around it. "David, do you even hear yourself? This isn't just a house. This is where you grew up, where your mother and I laughed and fought and built a life, and you want me to hand it over because your wife says so? Don't twist it, Dad," he muttered, his voice defensive. "We just want what's best." "For who?" I shot back. "For me or for her?" There was no answer, only silence. Finally, he muttered something I couldn't catch and hung up. I set the phone back in its cradle and sat there in the dim light, my heart heavy. Losing my house was one thing. Losing my son to her influence. That was a hurt I hadn't braced myself for. The days that followed were some of the most unsettling I'd ever lived in that house. Lindsay began showing up without invitation, breezing in as though she owned the place already. Sometimes she'd arrive with a pie she probably bought at the store, other times with fabric swatches or a rolled-up set of curtains draped over her arm. "Oh, this living room will look so much brighter once we repaint," she'd say, running her hand along the walls like she was already planning the color. "And these cabinets, Henry, they're terribly outdated. We'll have to replace them, maybe stainless steel appliances in the kitchen, too. A house this size should be modern."
Every word cut me like a blade. She wasn't just talking about renovations, she was erasing Helen. My wife had chosen those floral curtains herself. She'd picked the wallpaper for the dining room. Even the squeaky cabinet doors in the kitchen carried memories of her cooking Sunday roasts. To Lindsay, all of it was junk to be ripped out and replaced. I tried ignoring her, keeping my responses short, but she filled the air with her plans as though my silence was consent. David often tagged along, standing behind her like a shadow, nodding or shrugging, rarely speaking up for me. That hurt more than her words. My son, the boy who once built a treehouse with me in the yard, was now letting his new wife march through our family home as if I'd already been written out. One evening after she left, I sat in the kitchen staring at Helen's handwriting still visible on an old recipe card pinned to the fridge. I realized then this wasn't just about stubbornness. If I didn't act, Lindsay would strip away not only the house but everything it stood for. She wasn't waiting for me to leave. She was trying to erase me while I was still alive. The very next morning, I knew I couldn't sit back any longer. If I let things slide, Lindsay would keep pushing, and sooner or later I might not be strong enough to hold my ground. So I put on my old jacket, grabbed the truck keys, and drove into town. My destination was a brick building on Main Street with a brass plaque by the door. Robert Hughes, attorney at law. Robert wasn't just my lawyer. He'd been a friend for decades. We fished together in our younger years, stood side by side at church picnics, and he'd even been one of the first to visit after Helen passed. When I walked into his office, he rose from behind his desk and shook my hand firmly, his gray eyebrows knitting when he saw the look on my face. "Henry," he said, "what brings you here in the middle of the week?" I sat down heavily and told him everything. About Lindsay showing up with the notary, about the stack of papers, about her parading through my house like a queen inspecting her castle. And worst of all, about David, my own son, echoing her words, suggesting I hand over the home I built with his mother. Robert leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He didn't interrupt once, just listened, his eyes narrowing with each detail. When I finished, he let out a long breath. "Henry, you need to protect yourself. This woman sounds bold. Too bold. If she's already trying to pressure you into signing documents, she won't stop here. Draft a new will. Lock down the deed. Make it ironclad." Hearing those words, I felt both relief and sorrow. Relief that I had a path forward. Sorrow that it had come to this, that I had to defend myself against my own family. But I nodded. "Do it, Robert. Let's make sure she never gets her claws on my house." Robert worked quickly. By the end of the week, every document was signed, stamped, and filed. The new will was clear as day. This house could not be touched as long as I drew breath. And when my time came, it would pass not to David, not to Lindsay, but to my grandson, Ethan, David's boy from his first marriage. That decision gave me peace. Ethan was 13 now, lanky and bright-eyed, with the same crooked smile David had when he was a boy. Every summer he spent weeks with me, climbing the old tree house out back, chasing fireflies in jars, and listening wide-eyed to the stories I spun by the fireplace in winter. He didn't just like the house, he loved it. He treated it like a second home, the same way David once had. I knew, deep in my bones, that Ethan would honor it. He would cherish the history, not strip it away for money or appearances. The night after I signed the will, I slept better than I had in weeks. For the first time since Lindsay stepped onto my porch, I felt like Helen's memory was safe. No one could trick me, pressure me, or bully me into giving up what we had built. Of course, I knew Lindsay wouldn't take the setback lightly. Women like her didn't quit. They schemed, they pressed, they came back twice as hard, but knowing I had the law on my side gave me strength. She could storm, threaten, even drag David along to push her agenda. It wouldn't matter. The ink was dry and the future of this house was secured. I remember sitting on the porch that evening watching Ethan chase a football across the yard, his laughter ringing out against the setting sun. For the first time in a long while, I smiled without worry. No matter what storm Lindsay brewed next, I knew the house would remain where it belonged. It didn't take long for the storm to arrive. 1 week later, just as the evening light was softening over the yard, I heard a car pull up. When I opened the door, there they were, David and Lindsay, standing on my porch like soldiers ready for battle. David shifted from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. Lindsay, on the other hand, looked sharp and sure of herself, a folder tucked under her arm. She didn't waste a second. "Mr. Walker," she said crisply, "it's time we finalize things. David and I need to move forward. This house is too much for you alone." David cleared his throat. "Dad," he added awkwardly, "Lindsay and I just think maybe it's time you let go. You shouldn't be living here by yourself." I stood firm in the doorway, my arms crossed. Upstairs, in my desk drawer, the will sat locked and waiting, stronger than any argument they could make. "No, David. This house is mine, and when I'm gone, it will belong to Ethan. Not you, and not her." The air thickened with tension. David looked like I'd slapped him. Lindsay's eyes blazed. "You selfish old man," she spat. "You'd rather give it to a child than to your own son and his wife." I met her glare head on. Better a child who loves it than an adult who only sees dollar signs. For a moment, silence hung heavy between us. Then Lindsay grabbed David's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "We'll see about this," she hissed. With a sharp tug, she pulled him down the steps, their footsteps pounding across the gravel as they stormed back to their car. I stayed on the porch long after they drove away, the night sounds of the crickets rising around me. I should have felt shaken, but instead, I felt something else, resolve. I'd drawn my line, and I wasn't moving. That night, after the dust of their visit settled, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders. The sun dipped low behind the sycamores Helen and I had planted half a century ago, the sky glowing orange and purple like a painting only God could make. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace wash over me. The battle with Lindsay was far from finished. People like her didn't give up easily. But I no longer feared what she could do. The house was secure. The will was ironclad. No lawyer, no trick, no folder of papers could pry it from me. And when I was gone, it would go to Ethan, the one person who truly understood what this home meant. I thought back over the years, Helen laughing as she burned a pie in that old oven, David taking his first steps across the living room, the nights we spent playing cards at the kitchen table while storms raged outside. Every corner of this place held those memories, woven into the wood and brick. To me, this wasn't property, it was life itself. I whispered into the evening, my voice soft but steady. "Don't worry, Helen. Our home is safe." The breeze stirred the leaves of the sycamores, and for a moment, I could almost feel her there beside me, the way she used to rest her hand on mine. As darkness crept across the yard, the crickets began their steady chorus. I leaned back in my chair, letting the night sound surround me. Lindsay could scheme all she wanted. David could waver in her shadow. None of it mattered anymore. The house would remain in the family, cherished by the grandson who loved it. For the first time in a long while, I closed my eyes and felt truly at rest.